Hello and welcome back to History Tweaks for another alternate history scenario. This time we talk about the famous Battle of Plassey, a battle which is up in the list with all the great battles that turned the course of Indian history, like the Battle of Hydaspes with Alexander, the Battle of Panipat of Babur, and the Battle of Kalinga of Ashoka. The defeat of Shiraj-Ud-Daulah, the Nawab of Bengal, paved the way to British domination in India and turned the East India Company from a trading company to a political power in the subcontinent. But apart from this, the Battle of Plassey is also famous as one of the great betrayals in Indian history. As we all know, the commander of the Nawab's army, Mir Zafar, had betrayed him to the British and conspired against him for various political and economic reasons, and had caused the defeat of the Nawab's army in the Battle of Plassey. The betrayal of Mir Zafar has taken epic proportions in the folklores of Bengal, and even today, the phrase "you are a Mir Zafar" is used to tell a person that he's not trustworthy. But even though the blame is pinned squarely on him, Mir Zafar wasn't the only conspirators. With him were the Bonik Rajas, or the traders of Bengal, which included one of the most wealthiest traders of the time, Mahatab Chand Jagat Seth. He was one of the first exchange bankers in India and possessed a huge amount of wealth. It is said that the expenses of Delhi Darbar by the Mughals also ran on Jagat Seth's loans. Folklore also has it that Jagat Seth's wealth was so immense that one could dam the river Ganga with his material possessions. But money was not the only thing Jagat Seth brought to the table. He brought with him the great diplomat Raja Krishna Chandra Rai, who was a great friend of the British. During his accession to the throne, Jagat Seth was an ardent supporter of the Nawab and is said to even have gave him a great gift at his coronation. But Nawab Shiraj-Ud-Daulah soon started to overreach himself. When Shiraj-Ud-Daulah acceded to the throne, the revenue of the Nawab was slowly coming down, and to increase that, he started taxing the merchants who were exempted from taxation earlier. This angered the merchants and Jagat Seth, and finally a humiliation at court pushed Jagat Seth over to the rival camp. It is said that the Nawab had slapped Jagat Seth in the court for opposing him on the taxation of the merchants. But whatever may have transpired, Jagat Seth soon started conspiring with the opponents of the Nawab. Then Shiraj-Ud-Daulah learned that the Europeans were expanding their fortifications in Chandarnagar and Fort William respectively. Fearful of their growing influence, he ordered the Europeans to stop immediately. The French agreed, the British did not, and hence Shiraj-Ud-Daulah amassed an army and marched towards Kolkata. On the 3rd of June, the fort at Qasim Bazar fell, and the Bengal army pushed further and encamped near the Maratha ditch on the 13th of June. On the 14th, Kolkata was laid on siege, and soon the fort fell as well. There, Shiraj-Ud-Daulah imprisoned all the administrators and their families in a dungeon in the Fort William, in an incident which is known as the Black Hole Incident or the Black Hole Imprisonment. These victories, however, were short-lived, and by January 1757, the fort had been recaptured by Robert Clive and the reinforcements from Madras. The Nawab's army had to retreat and encamped themselves in the garden of Omichan. But Omichan was a co-conspirator and gave away their positions, and hence the force was ambushed. The Nawab went back to Murshidabad and tried amassing an army, but he faced delays because of mutinous soldiers who demanded that their outstanding wages be paid before marching. And as Mir Zafar was the chief treasurer of the army, many historians believe that it was Mir Zafar's doing. The British continued to march on, and the sides met at the village of Plassey. Robert Clive positioned his troops in a L fashion inside a mango glade, and the Nawab positioned his in a fashion of a C. The Nawab's army also had time to entrench themselves near the north side of the village. Nawab had also sent some divisions to burn down a nearby outpost so that the British could not acquire the food and the supplies there. But this expedition had failed and British were in the possession of the supplies. The elite cavalry units and a part of the infantry were placed under his loyal advisors Mir Madan and Mohanlal, and a large portion of the southern flank was placed under the conspirator Mir Zafar. The battle started at around 8 a.m. when the French artillery division of Saint Frey fired into the British troops. The British didn't have a separate artillery division, but their artillery was combined into their infantry units. The Nawab also had specialized artillery units, some of them hauled by bullocks on bullock carts, which made them mobile and easily aimable. For the first 2 hours, the Nawab's army seemed to be gaining an advantage as volley after volley hit the British and caused some major damages to them. One of the volleys almost damaged and destroyed their artillery units in one of the flanks. But then disaster struck. Around 10 a.m., it started raining heavily around the area, and the Nawab's army hadn't carried tarpaulins, probably because of the hasty preparations, also probably because of conspiracy of Mir Zafar who might have prevented it. But in any case, the Nawab's army did not possess any way of covering their artillery and ammunition. The British, on the other hand, carried tarpaulins in huge numbers and covered their gunpowder, keeping their ammunition dry and effective. But the British camp wasn't without worries. They feared that Mir Zafar had reconciled with the Nawab as he was placed at the head of such a large army, and multiple times thought of going back and retreating to find better positions. But somehow they decided to keep pushing on. When the rain subsided, an ill-informed Shiraj-Ud-Daulah, thinking that the British artillery would also have been soaked, ordered a frontal assault of the cavalry into their infantry units, which killed his two loyal advisors. The British then started to unleash artillery fire on the Nawab's army. The division of Saint Frey was also damaged, and hence they had to fall back. Shiraj-Ud-Daulah persuaded the Nawab to go back to Murshidabad and ordered a general retreat. But during the retreat, Mir Zafar's army lingered on and was very slow as compared to its counterparts. The British first thought that they were planning to attack, but then, realizing that it was Mir Zafar's, attacked the much weakened force which was retreating north. The British started firing artillery at them, and in the frenzy, the Nawab's troops attacked into the artillery charge, decimating half of their forces. It is even said that Mir Zafar's division also fired at their own counterparts, and hence the Bengal army was decimated. Shiraj-Ud-Daulah fled Murshidabad but was soon captured and was forced to surrender, and the British put Mir Zafar on the throne as the Nawab, and he was basically the puppet of the British. And this unleashed the era of British dominance in Bengal and eventually in the whole of the subcontinent. But what if all that changed? What if the Nawab's forces had won the Battle of Plassey of 1757? To bring about this, we need to root out the conspiracy in the ranks of the Bengal army, and one of the best ways of doing this is to have the Nawab retain the support of Mahatab Chand Jagat Seth, whose support could have provided him with the resources and the military strength to ensure the victory. So let's dive in. On the 15th of April 1756, Nawab Shiraj-Ud-Daulah accedes to the throne. Just as in our timeline, conspiracies grow around Shiraj, with Mir Zafar, Rai Durlab and Yar Lutuf Khan as the major opposers to the Nawab. In this timeline, however, his loyal advisors, Mir Madan and Mohanlal, advised the Nawab to tread carefully so as to not gravely incite the merchants of Bengal. They also try and advise the Nawab against his impulses of anger and are helped in that direction by the Nawab's mother and his wife. Shiraj-Ud-Daulah was a generally well-versed administrator, and hence, in this timeline, he works on consolidation of the domains and in combating of the loss in tax revenues. But in this timeline, he maintains cordial relations with Jagat Seth, whose support helps the Nawab greatly in both consolidating the finances and in providing resources for strengthening of his army. The immense wealth of the great Jagat Seth has inspired many folklore, and the Nawab had now the support of this very resourceful man. Through Jagat Seth, Shiraj-Ud-Daulah would start expanding his relations with the local zamindars and Hindu Rajas of Bengal, most prominent among them Raja Krishnachandra Rai of Nadia. Krishnachandra Rai was a very gifted diplomat and administrator himself and would be of great help to the Nawab. Through the support of Jagat Seth, Shiraj-Ud-Daulah would have also gained support of the merchant guilds in various fields from mining to shipbuilding to textiles. And his support would also act as a counterbalance against the other powerful merchants like Omichand, who had given their support in the Mir Zafar camp. Shiraj-Ud-Daulah also uses the first months of his reign to gather support of the French, who were bitter from the loss in the Carnatic Wars. When both the British and the French start bolstering their forts in Qasem Bazar and Chandanagar respectively, the Nawab, seeing this as the infringement and overreach of the Farman by Farrukhsiyar, orders them both to stop. The French oblige, but the British don't. The Nawab starts drawing up plans for attacking the British. Jagat Seth is initially unhappy, but Mir Madan persuades him that it is only in their interest to limit the British, citing the Carnatic Wars as an example. Additionally, to relieve the threats of a Maratha or an Afghan attack, aided by Krishnachandra Rai, the Nawab signs the Treaty of Purnia with the Marathas, which held the promise that the Marathas and the Nawab would not attack each other until the threat of the Afghans is averted. This relieves some forces from the Maratha frontier, and Nawab leads 4,000 men to surround the fort of Qasem Bazar. Just like in our timeline, the fort of Qasem Bazar and then Fort William fall to the Nawab's army, and the officers of the East India Company are imprisoned in the Black Hole of Kolkata. Just like in our timeline too, the Nawab is forced to retreat by Clive around January 1757. The Nawab takes a precedence in Omichand's garden and is joined there by the militia of Krishnachandra Rai. But Omichand betrays the Nawab to Clive and a surprise attack is lodged by the British army. Just as in our timeline, the following fight inflicts heavy casualties on the Nawab's army, but the additional forces from the Krishnachandra Rai help the Nawab inflict greater damage to the company forces. The Treaty of Alinagar is signed and the Nawab returns to the capital. When discussing the failures of the campaign, the French advisors to the Nawab advise on the need of modernization of the army. There is also a concern of possible conspiracy raised by Krishnachandra Rai and Jagat Seth as an explanation of the sudden attack, and the Nawab asks Krishnachandra Rai to investigate the same. For the rest of the year of 1756, Shiraj-Ud-Daulah is engaged to start modernizing his army. Firstly, cavalry matchlocks are modernized and arquebuses are introduced for better fireability. On the other hand, investigation of Krishnachandra Rai hint at a possible conspiracy by Omichand and Mir Zafar, and hence Rai advises Shiraj-Ud-Daulah to cut Mir Zafar out of the major stream of military affairs. Shiraj-Ud-Daulah would be in denial at first that his respected commander is involved in a conspiracy against him, but Jagat Seth provides him with initial proofs and he is convinced to keep Mir Zafar out of the important information as a precaution. As an extension, Krishnachandra Rai also advises him to try reproaching with Rai Durlab, who was known to be friendly with Mir Zafar, to try and avoid another important commander falling into the conspiracy. On the 17th of May 1757, 7-year war breaks out and the British start making plans for attacking Chandanagar. Just as in our timeline, the master of garrisons in Hooghly is bribed by Robert Clive and Mir Zafar, and hence the garrison of Nawab's army stays in the fort without helping the French when Chandanagar is attacked. When Nawab hears of this, he is furious and orders an investigation. Preliminary investigations suggest corruption and some indication of conspiracy, and there are also many suggestions that Mir Zafar was present in Hooghly the very day. Hence, Shiraj-Ud-Daulah is more persuaded on learning about this and starts seeing Mir Zafar in a suspicious light. On 14th of June 1757, a declaration of war is sent by Clive, and the Nawab immediately orders the amassing of an army, but the servicemen refuse to march until their arrears have been paid. Assuming that the arrears may have been frozen by Mir Zafar to incite the troops, the Nawab asks Jagat Seth to provide for the arrears, saying that he would repay it after the war. The arrears are paid and the troops march out and reach Plassey by the 16th. This gives them more time to better entrench themselves, and they also evacuate some supplies from the fortress of Katwa. So the English are weakened and the Bengal encampment is stronger in this timeline. On the 23rd of June, the British reach and encamp in the Mango Grove, just like they did in our timeline. The formation of the Bengal army is same as in our timeline, but the command structure is changed. Mir Zafar was given the largest part of the army, but in this timeline, he and Yar Lutuf Khan are given smaller units. And the militia of Krishnachandra Rai is also added as a reserve behind the Nawab's army. 800 hours, the unit of Saint Frey shoots and the battle begins. The artilleries fire at each other and this causes some casualties on both sides. In 1200 hours, the rain starts, but in this timeline, more time for preparation and less hurried nature of entrenchment means that the army possesses ways of protecting the artillery from rain. As the rain stops, the artillery fire resumes, and as both sides are at similar firepower, the fire ends in a stalemate. Seeing the stalemate go on, the Bengal army hatches a plan to raid the English artillery company. The cavalry forces of Mir Madan join cavalry units from all other regiments and the militia of Krishnachandra Rai to circle around the south arm and attack the south flank of the East India Company army. The company forces are unprepared as the grove shields the approaching army from view. The attack is swift and the forces quickly fall back but inflict considerable damage to one arm of the army, hampering the firepower and relieving the artillery fire on the southern and the eastern flanks of the Nawab's army. The lower frontal artillery attacks means that the south flank is able to close in and the army lines of the Nawab's army moves closer. The Saint Frey artillery is also moved to the tank and the militia is used to cut off the British from the south. With more strikes and attack, the British suffer, but being encircled, exit is difficult. Suffering heavy casualties, Clive orders and retreat through the river and more troops are wounded in the process. As the weakened army retreats, it is attacked and decimated by artillery fires from the ground. Clive somehow manages an escape, but by July 1757, the fort of Qasim Bazar is sieged again and falls. The modernization of the army continues. Bengal at this point was also the shipbuilding capital of the Indian subcontinent, and shipyards start churning out ships to strengthen the Nawab's navy. Repeated attempts at breaching Kolkata fail. Meanwhile, the Nawab conducts an internal inquiry and finds the conspiracy of Mir Zafar. Mir Zafar is hanged for treason and his co-conspirators are imprisoned. By 1758, the British signed the Peace of Dhaka, where they agree to pay a war indemnity of 30 lakhs. In return, the Fort William is returned to the British, but rest of Kolkata comes under the Nawab's dominion in addition to the forts of Qasim Bazar and any other forts in Bengal. They are further disqualified from upgrading the forts anytime in the future. Chandanagar is returned to the French and Qasim Bazar is given to them as an outpost. In 1761, at the Battle of Fondevoche, the French are defeated and Pondicherry falls. In the Treaty of Paris concluding the 7 Years' War, the conditions of Treaty of Dhaka are upheld, but the fort of Pondicherry is not returned as the British wanted to remake their losses at Plassey. Meanwhile, the Nawab helps the Marathas with resources to help them fight the northern threat of Afghan. The Nawabs of Bengal and Oudh also joined to help the Sikhs in their battle in Lahore. In 1761, the Marathas are defeated at the Third Battle of Panipat, and the Afghan directly threatened Delhi. As a response, the Nawabs of Bengal, Oudh, and the Sikhs try and recapture Delhi. With repeated defeats at multiple battles at the hands of the Indians, the Afghans are weakened and Delhi is recaptured by Marathas by 1769. In 1767, the First Anglo-Mysore War breaks out. The Maratha Empire faces initial defeats at the hands of Hyder Ali, and receiving the news, Shiraj-Ud-Daulah also attacks border fortresses of the Marathas. The Bengal Navy also sieges Pondicherry and provides support to the Mysore forces. A regiment of the Bengal army is also sent to Mysore under the son-in-law of Mir Zafar, Mir Qasim. In the peace talks, Bengal receives some lands in the Odisha region, and with this defeat of the British, the myth of invincibility of the Europeans is weakened. The Nawabs of Bengal and Mysore also negotiate an alliance, and with help from the French, the Mysore and the Bengal army is strengthened. Additionally, the Dutch experts are also called in to improve the shipbuilding technology in Bengal, and the docks also start experimenting with ironclads. They supply the steel manufacturers of Delhi with raw materials and utilize Awadh's infrastructure to ensure a quick transport of the finished goods. In 1775, Raghunath Rao asked the British to interfere in the internal situation to oppose Nana Fadnavis and Madhav Rao II. In our timeline, there was a conflict between the Governor General in Bengal and the authorities at Bombay, which significantly weakened the British position. But in this timeline, the British are more willing and the Governor General at Madras does not oppose, and hence the British fight stronger and inflicts a series of blows at the Marathas. And even though the war is a stalemate, the areas of Bassein, Baroda and Salsette are ceded at the Treaty of Sarabai in 1781. On the other hand, the Anglo-Mysore War also breaks out in 1780. The Mysore army besieges Arcot and wages war against Hyderabad. The Bengal army also attacks the Sirkars from the north. In this timeline, the British do not have a strong base in Bengal, which means that, unlike in our timeline, the reinforcements take much longer to come, as the main headquarters is in Madras, which is itself precarious, and hence the reinforcements are routed through Bombay and hence arrive late, as they are also threatened by the Mysore navy. So Arcot falls in mid-October and then siege is laid on Madras, and soon Madras falls too. The reinforcements arrive and are able to take the port and fort of Madras, but the city remains under the control of the Mysore army. With Arcot and now Madras sieged, the British reinforcements are not able to move out, and the British route some of their reinforcements through the Maratha Empire and try to attack the northern holdings of the empire. But Tipu fights and repulses the attack and then sieges Vellore. Midway through the siege of Vellore, Hyder Ali passes away and Tipu Sultan takes the leadership of Mysore. On the other hand, Kolkata falls again to the Nawab of Bengal. The British Navy sieges Mangalore, but Tipu is able to recapture it. With Arcot and Mysore captured and the naval attacks fail, the British grow wary of losing more land holdings as the Anglophobic Nana Fadnavis starts veering against them, and fearful of a Maratha betrayal, they call for peace. In 1783, the Treaty of Mangalore is signed, and Tipu is made the Nawab of Arcot as well, and some lands of the Nizam of Hyderabad and Sirkars are added to the territories of Arcot. Kolkata is also given to Bengal, and the Nawab awards Fort William to the French. In 1789, French Revolution breaks out, and the support of the French to Mysore and Bengal is reduced. In our timeline, Tipu Sultan had gone to very great lengths to gain back the French support, but here Mysore doesn't face an existential threat, and hence such efforts are lesser, and hence French too lose their influence. In 1790, Nana Fadnavis and Madhav Rao II conduct talks with Mysore and Bengal for an alliance to avoid annexation of the empire. In 1795, Madhav Rao II dies and is closely followed by Nana Fadnavis in 1800. When Peshwa Bajirao II comes to power, he faces civil war in his own kingdom. He faces opposition from the various clans of the Maratha Confederation, and an uncertain age starts with his reign. The Peshwa is seen to be Anglophilic and has deep ties with the British. The British also openly support the Peshwa and his ascent to power as an alternative to Nana Fadnavis. So on one hand, if a civil war breaks out, the Peshwa is likely to be supported by the British. On the other hand, the Peshwas had signed the alliance with Bengal and Mysore just 10 years ago, which is still in force, and the Peshwa can still theoretically call in those kingdoms to help with a possible civil war. But these forces are also immensely Anglophobic and have defeated the British in many occasions. So now the Maratha Empire stands at a crossroad, and so does the fate of the Indian subcontinent. Will the Marathas take support from the British or from their Indian counterparts? And will the Indians be able to triumph over the British if the need comes? With Napoleonic wars on the horizon, the fate of the Indian subcontinent, that of Europe, and the whole world hangs in a fine balance. And only time can tell who would come out on the top. And this is where I'll end the video for now. Thank you for watching and have a great day ahead. Also stay tuned for the sequel to this video, which will come out on the channel as soon as possible. Don't forget to like and share to support this growing empire of ours, and subscribe to join its administrative ranks. Thank you and have a great day ahead.